Okay. Let me. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay. All right. All right, like I said, this first one is really short. This isn't going to take us very long. It's just kind of a little introduction to kind of the course itself and the first chapter here. And most of you guys are not too far removed from taking the Constitution test when you're in junior high or middle school, whenever that. So again, a lot of this stuff is basically kind of covering things that you guys had covered before here. But chapter 1, I'll usually when we start these presentations here, I'm always going to have the chapter, what we're covering and stuff like that. So chapter 1 is simply titled We the People. All right. And so this course is technically government, but we used to refer to this as civics. All right. And so a lot of other schools still kind of consider it civics. So when we kind of buy these textbooks, they kind of steer it towards that. So kind of a definition of what civics is here is simply the study of citizenship and government. So what you guys will do on that line there is just type in civics. All right. And so there's a heavy emphasis here on kind of like, within, civics, the concept of citizenship. A citizen is simply a legally recognized member of a country. Pretty easy stuff, right? All right. Now, we'll talk about other things, though. Here, we'll talk about because, as the United States, we are a nation of immigrants. All right. And so with that, we'll also talk about that where those who maybe not be classified as citizens kind of fit into that. And so there's still a kind of a place here in our country for that. But the idea with kind of being an American per se, like historically, like when I teach world history, I kind of compare it to like kind of when I talk about Roman history, the idea of being Roman at that time was something where it wasn't necessarily based on ethnicity per se, it was based on citizenship. And it's the same kind of similarity with being an American in that sense. We're a country that's kind of what oftentimes they refer to as an experiment. All right. We're a country that essentially is kind of founded on a lot of principles and stuff. With one of those principles is the idea of basically kind of coming here and kind of making a name for yourself. And essentially, we are a relatively young country compared to other places around the world. All right. So with this here, all right, the idea of big emphasis when we're talking about in civics, all right, is the concept of government. All right. And so simply your definition, your standard kind of Webster's dictionary definition of government here, organizations, institutions, and individuals who exercise political authority over a group of people. All right. And so in many cases, the early civilizations, government was one of those kind of aspects of civilization, the idea of kind of organizing, basically kind of trying to make sense out of various things to kind of keep a society together, right? And so in this course, when we talk about government, like at the end of the semester, you guys will be taking the U.S. Constitution test. That'll be primarily dealing with the federal government. When we talk about federal government, we're talking about the government based in D.C. But there's also state governments. Like you guys have to take the Illinois State Constitution. All right. And with that, you have within governments like this kind of shared responsibility between federal and state, often referred to as federalism. All right, we'll talk about that later in the course. Also, other types of governments, obviously, would be local governments, cities, counties, jurisdictions like that. All right, and so in a sense here, what we're mainly dealing with for your purposes for the most of this chapter is dealing with the federal government and its relation to other kind of institutions like local and like state governments. All right. So again, these are pretty easy definitions. You guys have been at least introduced to probably when you were in 7th and 8th grade, right? Another thing that when we kind of talk about like kind of in the concept of kind of American government is the idea of, and heavy within the Constitution of rights, right? So there's a emphasis here in the course on the study of kind of rights and responsibilities. All right. The difference is a right is a freedom that is protected, that is listed in something like a constitution. So most famously, when we talk about like the First Amendment, which we'll deal with when we get into amendments into the Constitution, the First Amendment is probably the most famous one. The idea of freedom of speech, you have freedom of religion, freedom of press. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Other amendments dealing with the kind of criminal cases and the right to a jury trial and things of that nature. A right is specifically listed in the Constitution. All right. But there's also a little bit of nuances there with certain rights. All right. With they say rights comes responsibilities. All right. Responsibility in a sense is a duty, something that you don't have to do, but you should do in a sense. Like a prime example of a responsibility is just something that occurred in November. Voting. Voting is viewed as a responsibility. All right. Now, in certain sense, it could also be a right because it's been listed in the Constitution, like with the 15th Amendment, with the passage of the voting rights for African American males, the 19th Amendment with the suffrage right to vote for women. 26th with the 18th. But other responsibilities would be like staying informed, kind of like in a local level, like kind of being involved in the community. Like a prime example of that would be like K-Hawk Strong. All right. So some of the responsibilities are things that are they're kind of wide. It's essentially something that you should do. All right, in that sense. So there'll be in a lot of aspects with this in this course, we're kind of dealing with kind of the balance here between rights and responsibilities. All right, we'll talk a little bit more detail when we get into the amendments with that one. All right, another thing about kind of like American kind of like civics and government is that we're a country that's, like I said, like an experiment here, and there's a emphasis on ideals, all right, beliefs here. Okay. And so with this ties in with values, a principle or standard of behavior. Ideals and values tend to go hand in hand. All right. And so within kind of like, kind of our system of government, starting with the Declaration of Independence. All right. We're a nation that had influenced other countries around the world. All right. Like with our revolution, we see the French Revolution using a lot of the same kind of concepts and ideas. All right. And we'll talk about historically, like the idea, like how the Age of Enlightenment is going to kind of encourage these values and ideals. So there's essentially three kind of important ideals and values within our system of government. And you say within our society. All right. Now, in a lot of cases, ideals are something to try to achieve, but not always are they obtained. All right. And you can see what was going on this past summer with a lot of protests after the George Floyd incident. You could see these ideals being kind of like basically kind of questioned to a certain extent, or at least demanded. All right. Rightfully so. So the kind of three kind of main ideals and values that we could kind of narrow down to kind of American government and society in that. One would be equality. This is listed in the Declaration of Independence in the U.S. Constitution. Equality is each citizen has the same right to enjoy the benefits granted to all other citizens. All right. And in American history, it's equality hasn't happened at the same time. Right. And that's the thing about our system that is one of the positive things, is the sense that we are constantly we need people to try to kind of challenge that, to try to kind of demand for equality. All right. Same thing here with liberty, the state of being free within society. All right, free from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority, life, behavior, political views, and things of that nature. Liberty is a very kind of like, again, another one of these kind of not vague, but it's very overarching in its sense. All right. But again, like some people, what their idea of liberty may be different from another person's. All right. And that debate is kind of something that has always kind of been throughout kind of American history here. But the idea that we are kind of based on this idea from coming from a what our founding fathers believed to be an oppressive government in England. All right. you had that famous speech, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. All right. So this is a value, this is an ideal that, that we try to achieve here. All right. Do we always reach this? Maybe not necessarily. But again, the Constitution is a document that kind of encourages this. All right. Am I moving too fast? You guys staying with me?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I'm just assuming because I can't see you guys, everybody's sleeping. But if those of you guys are awake, I appreciate it. All right. Justice is the third ideal or value here. All right, and that's the last thing in notes for the day. Again, justice is the legal or philosophical theory by which fairness is administered. In our, again, justice, like the idea, there's a famous statue with the Lady Justice kind of holding the scales of justice as blind. The idea that in our system, you should look at the evidence at hand. But in many cases, with our system as it is, justice isn't always administered equally. And that's something, again, is an ideal and a value that we're kind of striving to kind of achieve here. All right. So that's basically the notes for today. All right. Like I said, it's going to be pretty short, just kind of an introduction to some of these terms here. Tomorrow, I want to move on to section 2. And tomorrow and Friday, we're going to be it's going to be dealing with kind of the concept of kind of like who are Americans. It'll be a lot of history, if you guys don't mind. We're going to be going back to try to kind of like trace our steps that gets us to essentially the kind of like the Constitution. All right. So if you guys can submit those notes back to me, I will send them back to you, and that will be your first grade. And then tomorrow, I sent out yesterday that that little scavenger hunt thing. I got the due date for tomorrow. If you're done with it early, you can turn it in. Just look through the internet to find those answers. They're pretty easy answers. Shouldn't take you longer than 15 minutes. All right. Does anybody got any questions or concerns?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, you guys have a good rest of your